different questions. Well, I'm absolutely sure that our legislation system has already been prepared based on the law on the 2005 on equal opportunities, gender opportunities, and also it's also supported with the specific actions to counterpart discriminations. Also, we've done it. Also, we're just dealing with on the level of KMO, the different other actions on the level of the Ministry of Justice. We do have a lot of recommendations done and the normative act. So what we have to do, we just have to apply it. The idea is our internal force and understanding what to do. And the gender expertise should be done. And it should not be only on paper, because it should be a real help and support for women. I am 41 years old, and I am the head of the Committee of Women. And I also analyzed how many women we had. We had 2, 3 in this committee, women, and then they were different. And 20 and 23, so we had not so many women. As for the academician approach, I was the first deputy of the Department of the Law Department of the university named after Karazin, and I was the specific person dealing with the PhD process, dissertations process, etc. So, but I do have 2 kids, but I've never faced a lot of limits and limitations. So, well, it seems maybe I was happy, maybe I was lucky, because always my husband and all the male friends, they were partners, they supported me. So we do have specific mentality of women here. So, well, in our country, women means brave, strong people, and that means a very important thing. So, Mrs. Elena, my great respect to you. I saw on Friday that this is Women's Congress, and I understand that that's a kind of a very important gender issue. I'm a captain of police. I have 10 years of experience in law enforcement. I have the different, tactics preparation. I do have a lot of other experiences. Men, they were always assigned me, and also I had the dissertation. My mom also was the housekeeper, but she made this PhD dissertation, and also she proved that she could do this, and she worked and she lived completely with her family ideas. So, well, at least we have to understand what we're going to be. Maybe just the beloved one, or the justice person, or the judge, or whatever. So, well, I think we have lots of celebrations in Ukraine, Malanka and others. So we have a lot of power and a lot of women's forces. It's a kind of a traditional celebration, Malanka, etc. So it's a kind of our local traditions. Women's celebrations are named after women. Now I would like to talk to Mr. Denisov, our Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights. So even this year, we had lots of interesting scandals dealing with the sexist sayings from the different public people, and we had lots of ombudsman's mechanisms to provide this public penalties, etc. So, and for us, we have to understand this public sphere, and we have to understand that the majority of the society should understand that the gender-balanced language is very important, and you should not oppress the person despite of the genders or other features, etc. What do you think? Do we need to change something in our legislation system just to be more active, just to be very active in punishment and to do something with this? What do you think? Good afternoon. Thank you Thank you for the co-heads of the Ukrainian Women's Congress for inviting me. I'm thankful, and I think that today is a kind of a celebration, and it's a celebration would support the International Human Rights Day, and this is the 71 anniversary and of the human rights declarations. Human rights should not be limited by something, including even the human rights of women. And I support all of you, and I support you because we do have lots of cases to deal with just to be equal. And regarding of the responsibilities and rights, in many European countries, we have the special ombudsman on the discrimination issues in Moldova, for example, in Scandinavian countries, in Poland. But according with the Article 101 of our Constitution, this ombudsman has the so-called universal model of responsibilities. So, well, this all that rights and responsibilities of ombudsman is also gives the opportunity to monitor, to follow the equal rights and opportunities, and to have the monitoring visits, to visit the specific courts cases, and to deal with the cases of discriminations and etc. But we also make some specific solutions, and we understand that we have to have the specific questions onto the very special numbers of questions and towards the judges. And we have to understand that everything should be within the questions dealing with discriminations, and we have to deal it correctly. And we understand that the status of ombudsmen to be accepted the correct way. So well, I agree with you, Mrs. Larissa, and as of today, we're very thankful to the members of parliaments, and because it's on the go to have this new project to enforce the activities of the Office of Ombudsman regarding the anti-discrimination policy. So, and we do have lots of norms, well, and the ombudsman could accept these abilities to provide the opportunity to protect the human rights, especially to protect the women from discriminations. But every woman could be in this situation, and every woman should have the protection. And I remember the cadences and terms, and we had some sexist sayings from some members of parliament towards specific women deputies, and especially me as the ombudsman. I applied to the committee regarding the regulations issues, and we made a specific decision to push this member of parliament to apologize.
And what is basically happening in our law enforcement society? Now we cooperate with many Eurofem, for example, organization, Cherit, Lila Strada, Ukraine, so many human rights activisms, the group of Opora, the group of influence, but all of these organizations are basically participants to the project of the commissioner activity. We have the coordinating council, and I offer everyone who would like to join us. And at the end of my speech, I should mention that the Ombudsman institution is a kind of leading human rights activist organization in our country, according to our constitution. And I would like to congratulate the state and the members of parliament that ensure the legislation and all our democratic society that 2 weeks ago the Ombudsman institution as the commissioner got the highest level of support and status A as the highest level of corresponding to Paris principles. Our institution is recognized as legal, reliable and relevant and trustworthy, and it is written corruption in the opinion, then we act both at national and regional levels. So I would like to express my gratitude to all of the human rights activists for their support, and this is a kind of celebration for all of these institutions in Ukraine. So thank you, Ms. Denisova, and yesterday it was the International Anti-Corruption Day. Today is the International Human Rights Day, and these are the things which connected in. And this year we had a lot of research, one of them which was led by the representative of the UNO in Ukraine. It dealt with corruption, and they revealed such things as gender-oriented corruption, which means that, for example, at the level of social life, more often women report about different services, and they face the corruption. Apart from this, the majority of sexual so-called offers for the service is actually to the women, and in some, I would like, gray area with the so-called of the boundaries between the occupied territory and Ukraine. And I have a question to Ms. Chornenka. Basically, do we have this understanding of these indicators and whether these indicators are included into the anti-corruption court activity? Good afternoon, everybody. A little bit of positive things today. When I tried to talk to my personnel yesterday about the information, what do we have in terms of gender policy, the first record of 37 judges, female judges, but in general we have 62% of women together with the main framework, and it all covered the fact that of 70% of heading position is actually taken by the women. And when we had the second meeting of the heads of different courts, after the elections for the appeal court, when Olena Vitalyevna Tanasevich was elected, and we had the elections for the appeal chamber. One of our colleagues said that we have 3 women in appeal chamber. When we were fighting who is stronger, they took the post. So this is actually to our motto that opportunities inspire, and we should exploit this opportunity given by our life. And in terms of these studies, these researches that we have, basically what means is, which has great influence in the story of us Ukrainian mentality. We consider women as a home maker, and the man is the breeder, the breadwinner, and women deal more with giving birth to children, bringing up the children, and I don't think that we are going to fight against it, but still we see that women sacrifice their time to children much more. And I think it is also connected to the fertile capacity of women, because in this time she has to apply for different services rather than men. And if the statistics already exists, so it is connected to the fact that we have children, we would like to have children, and we love our children. Thank you. And how often in anti-corruption field of justice you face with gender stereotypes? Do they exist in terms of the judges, I think? Well, personally, I haven't witnessed anything of a kind. Probably I got lucky because of this, but personally, I don't have such kind of experience. So probably some revealing, bright revealing or undercover revealing. In terms of those people who come to us or who is brought to us, I think we have more men, we have less women. Of those people who are brought to us. It's a very interesting remark indeed, but still talking about the stereotype. We have such things which deal with every woman, probably not like personally you, but things which are published in mass media, where you can hear a message like that anti-corruption court has a lot of women, because women in their nature, they are much more rigid and they are stricter. And when we hear something like this, it's like, you know, it doesn't concern to us personally, but it concerns to the judicial system and to the principles of justice, because justice is not, is actually fairness and equality of everybody against the law, keeping rights and freedoms, and not about trying to play it who is more rigid and who is stricter. I think when we have elected and appointed and we had contests for the positions, everybody who had the interviews, we had the broadcasting in YouTube channel, and you know, I was actually present at the interview for candidates for the positions of the department, let me say, the appeal chamber, and at that point I haven't had that idea in mind. It was very important to me whether the person is experienced and what kind of professional he or she is. And as now we have in appeal chamber most equal balance, like 50-60%, it is only the demonstration that we have selected according to the professional competencies. And if somebody is interested in it, you can watch. The transparency of contest gives us the opportunity for women to reveal them, to show them, to demonstrate them. And if we had more of this, it would be much better. I express my full agreement with you, and I think Valentina Danishevska also has spoken about this public, transparent contest, when you can observe the interview, what are the professional qualities of this person. It actually helps us to feel protected and more response. And I would like not to leave the anti-corruption fight and have a conversation to Ms. Tsekelashvili, because often you see the fact that somebody says anti-corruption fight, this is mostly the men's fight, but Ms. Daniela objects. We have different models to this, and now, according to the European Union, Raula Kvesha is a prosecutor who is kind of famous for her anti-corruption fight. In your opinion, in terms of human rights advocacy and female rights advocacy and preventing the corruption, what is the common point and what should we keep in mind, and whether women in this field can change the culture of administration and treating men and women?
It's terrific to be here. I'm very glad that I have an opportunity to address excellent audience like that and to be with the colleagues at the panel which have distinguished already themselves in their own professions and then in the fields of the activities that I engage now as well. Just to give maybe a brief account who I am, where I come from when it comes to relevance to the issues that we are talking about today and then continuously during the day and tomorrow. I'm a woman. I'm still, I believe, a young woman in the profession, which is quite complex for a woman to be. And I have been in this field for quite some time now. In my own country, in Georgia, I've been engaged in the positions in the law enforcement and in the field of justice where women have never been previously at that level of the positions. I've been the Prosecutor General of my own country, I've been Deputy Minister of Interior, Minister of Justice, have been the Secretary of the National Security Council, all of the professions which previously have been deemed quite a bit manly, so to say, so that women would not have been natural fit in the way how the society could have seen that. And when I look back now, how it all came true, and then what was the main factor, perhaps, that led me to that path, apart from commitment, ambition in my own profession, diligence, I would say, it all starts with our own internal invisible ceilings, I guess, when we develop our own understanding what is possible and impossible as women, at an early stage, perhaps, if that happens, and then we just let ourselves with that belief that something is proper or improper, or possible or impossible. And then I would say that as a starting point in the field of law enforcement, where it is much more complex to be a woman, we still have to admit that, whether that be police, prosecution, or even judiciary, but to a lesser degree when we speak about the field of justice, not the law enforcement. That internal invisible ceiling is the worst that a woman can have, because either that leads for somebody to make a decision that it's not the profession that one needs to be in as a woman, or if you are in, sometimes to act too much like a man to prove that you're as good as the men are. And that's a wrong attitude as well. Women are as good or even better in some respects, in some professions, as men are, without proving that they need to do in terms of their own equality and alignment with the qualifications that the men have. And one stereotype that I fiercely oppose myself, I have to say, is that cliche that women are somewhat different when it comes to being more soft, consensus builders, and mindset that brings a different angle with the way how things can be, arranged at the policy decision level. At times, especially in the law enforcement field, decisions have to be quick, they have to be drastic, they have to be radical, especially when the country is undergoing reforms, as it is the case quite largely in Ukraine. And women are fully apt to be as radical, drastic, and fierce as the men are. We are not soft, and we are not too much of a consensus buildings when we don't have to be, and quite opposite when we need to. And this is important to keep in mind in the professions like law enforcement specifically, when almost on a daily basis, a policeman, a prosecutor could be really be forced to deal with the situations of a crisis, and then quick reaction to it, sometimes radical approach to it, sacrificing your own interest, and then security threats being part of the deal, so to say, as well, is something that the women have to deal on a daily basis in this profession. And then when one makes that decision, you have to be ready for that, because sacrifice is obviously part of that. In anti-corruption field, I don't believe myself that when it comes with the way how one exercises justice as a judge, or if you are a prosecutor or an investigator when it comes to the investigation of the corruption-related crimes, there is any difference when it comes to are you a woman or are you a man. It's the level of professionalism, obviously, that matters, and decisiveness and commitment to do the job that you are supposed to do. But what we see in the corruption field as a difference is that there are more suspects, indictees, so to say, people who are charged with the corruption crimes, but not because of the fact that women are better when it comes to the more moral underpinnings of how we behave. I have to be honest about it. It's just because of the portion or ratio of the power sharing in the positions where you might be corrupt at the level where the corruption-related crimes are being prosecuted by the court, like the specialized court. So it is a plus and downside at the same time. I believe that if women are more in the positions where they could be tempted to be corrupt, they will withstand that temptation. But the mere fact that there are less women who are prosecuted for those crimes doesn't say anything. Mostly it says quite the opposite to the positive angle that we could have had in this discussion. It means that in businesses or in the higher-level positions, there are just more men who are more tempted or are eager to exercise their positions in the way that could lead to the corruption-related crimes. What we see from the side of fight against corruption, however, and that's more related, I guess, related to not the high-level corruption per se, but then petty corruption, is that women are more committed to see that corruption is effectively fought against, because they experience in their everyday life more of it, in the healthcare system, in education, in the way how they are getting jobs, and how they are promoted at their jobs. So in that regard, women are stronger when it comes to being committed as the fighters against the corruption, but that is not confined, obviously, to the field of law enforcement only, but generally with the way how these civil society groups are being formed, how we see the activism coming in the field of investigative journalism or in the civil society as well. So I would say that women are strong force to count on when we speak about corruption and then fight against corruption specifically. It would be a false expectation to see that when it comes to the positions in the law enforcement or the justice, it makes a huge difference when it comes to how better they are compared to the men in terms of exercising their authority. I would really hope and count that it's just the level of professionalism and due diligence that everybody exercises in those very responsible positions. But at the end of the day, as much as we have a better mix and then positioning in the way that men and women are equally engaged in this fight, better fit we are to be effective, obviously, in this fight. So that's what we do quite actively from the side of the European Union, from the program that is implemented here in Ukraine as an anti-corruption initiative. We do have the gender mainstreaming as part of the policy decisions that we do make, and then how we exercise that with our partners so that they take that into account. And if anybody could look into the statistics of the practice of the organizations like NABU, which is the specialized agency for investigating corruption crimes, or even specialized prosecutor's office, and then quite obviously in the case of the High Anti-Corruption Court as well, women are a strong force, well-represented force in the fight against corruption in Ukraine from this perspective, and I believe that that will be even stronger over the course of the time.
Thank you so much. So the 5th on December, the Valentina Zhmezhi from Crimea got the very special award, the Golden Tulip, for supporting the rights and freedoms of Crimean and Tatars. And Tami Latasheva, whom I would like to invite, Tami Latasheva was in charge of all that people who are living here in Ukraine, and you always dealing with the advocacy to support your nation. And I know that a lot of Crimean Tatars, those who are out of the legal educations, we're just not talking about the human rights activist activities only dealing with the specific support, but people from Crimea, they understand that they need to fight for their rights, and they have to understand how to behave better, how to be safe here, and just to be in accordance with the dignity principles, to follow these principles of dignity, etc. So, and how to deal with that people, those who are staying in the occupied, temporarily occupied territories. And we're just talking about the fact that the majority of the internally displaced people, the majority are women and kids. And so, could you share with us what have been done and what the gender sensitivity is also a very important issue for you personally? Thank you so much, Larissa. Thank you. And it's a great pleasure to speak here, because today we celebrate the Human Rights Day. So, 1 month even ago, I've been dealing 5 years and a half. I've been dealing with this specific law enforcement issues. So in the year 2014, I established together with my friends the organization Crim SOS. That's the time of the deputy permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So, and it's the authority body mainly consists of women. So, the permanent representative is Mr. Karinevich, and we are 2 deputy permanent representatives. We're women, and it's very important for our activity. So just to answer your question, I would like to say that in reality, the movement of women, it's about the solidarity. And talking about the solidarity, this is what I want to say first. That's the face of the protest movement in Crimea. And I'm absolutely sure that the face of protest is of women's face. And why? Because those women who are wives, daughters, etc., those wives of the political prisoners, etc. So what they are doing, they are just, taking the responsibility for their families, for their fights to make their husbands free. And we do have lots of movements for journalists, and that's the advocates, Lila Gemenji, you've told about us, Eminev Emilia, Crimea. So, well, she worked for a long period of time in the human rights sphere, and she's still working in this. And we do have lots of women, those who were actively involved into the freedom movement. I also would like to remind about the Vijaya Kashket and so when she unfortunately was killed, and Lila Bujirova, Jesus Muratova, so they established a specific fund, Bezambalar, Our Kids. This is the name of this fund, and why I'm just telling about these names. I can verbalize 100 of that names. So why? Because that's the number of the political prisoners. We can talk about this. We're just talking about the specific, even everyday-based investigations and in the houses of the Crimean Tatars, etc. So it happened. So we can touch the names of every woman and talk about every woman's case. And we're just talking about the women's movement. We have to talk about our rights, and especially about our rights in that temporary occupied territories. That's the rights of women are violating massively. And what I want to say, and the law enforcement bodies and the human rights movement, and this is the very special female movement. So that's, we are very sensitive. I am interested in this issue a lot, and especially I'm just studying a lot of scientific research on this issue. And one of the research I found an interesting issue about the reaction from the sides of women towards stress. So, well, we have the different acceptance of the stress. In our head, we have the neurons-based structure, and it works differently. We react differently than the men. And what we say about the very strong stress, for example, the explosion of the grenade or whatever. So, and when we got the stress, the male's brain, it's like prolongs the reaction, and in female's brain, this reaction is shorter. So, well, maybe the women's reaction is not so strong, but we have stress, and it's a long-term stress. If we have the long-term stress, we can say that the neurons system of women's structure, the neurons are more stress resistant, and the neurons of the brain of a woman is becoming actively reacts than the male's neurons. So, well, the law enforcement activities based on the different challenges, I mean, occupation of Donbass and the temporary occupation of Crimea, I tell you definitely it's a kind of a long-term stress. All the women, those human rights activists, they are following the specific rules to protect the rights. They are hearing a lot of witnessing from different people, those who were imprisoned, those who were under tortures, etc. Those human rights activists, women, they are dealing with this not because they are more sensitive, but because physically we just created like this. From one side, we are very sensitive. From another side, we, I think, more responsible for this. And I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud that I'm a woman, and I am proud that in this law enforcement activity, we have lots of women. And in other different researches, we say that we have 16 different skills, and this skills are really defined a specific manner of leadership. So based on these 16 skills, you can find the best manager, etc. So, well, these 16 skills is very important, and women are ahead of men based on these 16 skills. And one of the skill is teamwork, the ability to work with stimulus, with team, and observing the law enforcement organizations. And the majority of them have the women leaders, and women, they have more empathy towards the team members. They're working actively with the team. They better in motivation of initiatives to motivate initiatives from the side of the team members, etc. So we're just talking about the specific features of women. But to answer the question of Larissa, I want to say, I want to call the organizers of this conference to invite the representatives from the occupied territories of Donbass and the temporarily occupied territories from Crimea to be present here. So the more you will know about these women, the better protection they will get over there. And I'm absolutely sure, 100%, Lila Gemilji, who got this award from the government of Netherlands, for her, it's very interesting because she got this specific resistance from specific bodies, and Mr. Mustafa was still in prison, and he is under the case investigation. So, talking about this lady, the lady is coming, the Muslim lady who's coming to the court to protect the people, and then the judge greets her, and then the judge says, yeah, we will try to do our best not to discriminate your rights. And we're talking about the ideals. The ideals, the majority of them are women, or women of the senior ages, or the kids. But for me, the key thing is to avoid discrimination, to avoid the ideals discriminations. It's very important, because the ideal people, the IDPs, is also very discriminated, especially based on the gender. So internally displaced people, that's the very vulnerable thing, and then vulnerable people. So we have to follow their rights, and we have to fight the rights of the people. So thank you, Tamila. Thank you for your important words for all of us. And I have the special common question. Before passing the words to another speaker, I want to tell you that in June we had the Forum of Women Lawyers, and we were discussing a lot of issues. So that means leadership of the women. We were talking about leadership and the expertise of women. We were talking about the advocacy of the women's right, what we can do for women, those who are in a very complicated circumstances, etc. So I have the question, what do you think? What does it mean, leadership, from your side? What do you think about your role to motivate women working in the legal sphere? How to motivate them to support their colleagues, to support those people who are asking for their help, how to make it better? And advocacy campaign, this is what you were talking about, and this is what we would like to get from you. We're talking about the multi-discrimination issues also to be covered. So we want to understand what is the discrimination for Roma women. What about the justice system? What the sensitivity of justice towards a different experience. If we're talking about the advocacy campaign, how important to keep the advocacy pulse and just to cover the very important issues on gender equality and etc. Thank you for your. You always have such a specific questions. I'm very thankful for your questions and very deep questions. And first of all, what for me leadership means? Well, leadership means the possibility to realize yourself, and it means that you or you do have these opportunities or you don't. Or you have to understand what would you want to reach, or it's a kind of a mission, or it's a goal, or it's a target, and we have to say that we have to determine, and we have to determine on the specific step of your life's circle. You have to understand what you're doing, your life goal or mission or whatever. It seems to me that we do understand the mission of our life, and leadership, it's how to realize your mission from one side. From another side, it's a kind of an important content to be responsible for what you're doing, and that it's interrelated in between. So, well, it works, but you have to be in balance, and leadership should not transform into the different status. Leadership should be in balance. Your how to be a leader and how to attract people to be leaders. You know, I'm a teacher. We had the School of Private Law, and the only one answer. You have to attract others, but by your own life example. Or you just, throw your trash into the specific trash can or just on the streets. You can talk a lot about civilizations, about the values, but you have to be very good on your personal example. As for parliament and justice, how to react and how to deal with the gender opportunities, I think that the idea is that we are not on time. Our turbo regime is okay, but we're just trying to do very fast something. But the life is so influential, and life is so fast, and business is more even faster than the legal structures. So legal structures should be the representative of the interests of the people. We should react, but to pass through all the different steps, we have to understand that it should be on time. It should not be late. So challenges of the businesses also have been changed, but we have to understand and accept. So we already covered, we have to understand that we have to be on time. As for the justice, we had the very interesting conversation yesterday about the e-justice. We were talking about 40 minutes. In the beginning, we were thinking to have 40 minutes, but we were talking about 3 hours. So it should be not e-judgments, but it should be not e-courts, but e-justice system. The artificial intellect, that's good idea. So it could be helpful, and it helps. But the judge is the human being, and the human being, she or he, should understand the circumstances. And if you just using the algorithm, some understanding of this, or you should understand that the judge should be the judge, and the emotions in system of justice is also very important. We have to apply the specific procedures rules, and we have to react despite of these rules differently. The justice should be objective. Justice should be justice, and justice, it should be different colors, the same circumstances, but the motives could be different. So, well, everything deals with our values, with our responsibilities for what we're doing. Thank you so much.
От бачите, мені тепер легко після вашого виступу, тому що я скажу.
So it's easier to me now to say after your speech, and they say that they take the laws and then we implement the laws, yeah. So basically everything, we have a lot of opportunities in legal sphere to undertake the limits for penalties. There are specifics for pregnant women who have minor children, depending on what's the child's age. So in this perspective, I think in our legislation we have changed it for the better in terms how to treat the women specifics, and it's very, very nice. But if to comment on the implementation or how to use it, when we observe the collegiate case, we have 3 women of different age, but everyone has her own vision upon the situation. And these views rarely coincide when you decide on the penalty. It's never actually coincides in terms of volume. I don't know what's the reason for this. Probably it's my personal experience, gives its imprint, or psychological condition of how to treat this or that situation. But still we have what we have. And if to have like to have 5, 10 or different judges, probably with the same experience and age, to take decisions, the decisions could be different. So in our legislation we have this, I would say, limits, yeah. And of course there are some peculiarities, but this topic is extremely important. It should be highlighted, especially by those women who are already in the places of imprisonment, because separation from the child, separation from the family, it's a separate topic to be discussed, and we still have a lot of things to do in this sphere. In terms of leadership, I would like to say that, we have certain periods in every person's life when he or she decides to change something in life, and I also had such life condition when I have decided that I haven't done anything yet, something prominent, and we need to move on. And when they were just contest announced, I decided to come to the highest justice council for the contest for the anti-corruption court, and I would like to say that, dear colleagues, don't be afraid and just give it a try and you will achieve success. Thank you very much, Ms. Denisova. When talking about leadership, what is supposed to be considered as leadership and in which field this leadership is? I believe that you think you are a leader. This is a huge responsibility. And it is so that I'm a leader of my family, and it's it's an obligation for me. It's example for my 2 daughters and for my 4 grandchildren. And they already watch TV or hear to some news or observe it on Facebook and always ask about how our mom or our grandmom is dealing. And when I have a nice post there, they respond to it. They are being proud of me, and because our mom and our grandmom is a leader. But in terms of leadership on the position, when you have a particular authority in the institution, I think that it is even more of obligations and responsibilities here, because family circle, they would forgive you if something goes wrong. But if you are the leader, a minister, or the head of a committee, or the commissioner, and it's a very complicated job to do, and if you don't have such qualities to be the leader, because the commissioner, for example, this is one-person institution, and you cannot avoid being a leader, because for my team personally, I decide on the structure, on representatives, on how many people should work, and for every personality, for each employee, you are supposed to be the leader. And here I agree with my colleagues who are here today that this is only via your personal example. When you work dusk to dawn and you do so many business trips, more than there are hours in day and night, they also try to keep up with you, and it brings certain results. And I would like to speak about my team, that it is the best team. Whatever happens, whatever mistakes we make, we're going to correct them, and we should do it is required to protect our citizens and to actually to show to those institutions, plus the state institutions, who do not keep the human rights. And coming up to your question, Ms. Larissa, actually, we have a lot of cases for women who deal with human activism, human rights activism. We have observed the attack at Jela Belova, who represents the Roma organization Cherita, and I reacted immediately to national police, and there is criminal proceeding, and we monitor the investigation and the measures taken by the law enforcement bodies and then the judicial bodies. And every single case is under monitoring. And I would like to address now to everybody and to highlight that Commissioner on annual basis deals with 30,000 of applications, but only 400 of claims deal with equal rights and fighting discrimination. You understand that? So it means that nothing is happening in Ukraine. We do know that something is actually going on, that there is discrimination, not only according to the gender, but also according to the status, such as internally displaced person, because I'm also internally dispersed person. And I think that we need to have a great educational campaign, and we have done together with human rights activists and civil activists, together with the community. We had more than 50 events within this program, and when we talk to our citizens, they do not actually they do not see the difference. So what is right, what is equality, what is gender? And we have a lot of work ahead to explain, because the first article of Constitution of Ukraine says that Ukraine is sovereign, independent and democratic social, as you've spoken at the very beginning. This is social sphere and the state of rule of law. So this is our agenda, how the state should act and how we should do everything that this kind of state is going to occur, and our citizens should have information about their rights and how to use it. And I'm grateful to this event that we are also doing some educational work. Thank you very much. And really today we are heard not only by people in the audience but in the internet. And Eka,
Have some more time for the questions. A few points. Leadership. To me, leadership is gender neutral in many ways. I've been raised in the 90s, in the chaotic times, and then followed by extremely corrupt and bankrupt times of the early 2000s in my own country. So for me, meritocracy is the basis for everything. And in that regard, it's gender neutral. So when it comes to the leadership, from the position of leadership, if I understand the question correctly, how one could promote more engagement and inclusion of women in professional lives, it's a merit of a given individual that matters to me profoundly, rather than gender at the moment, when any promotion or anything in terms of the inclusiveness could be subject of consideration. But having said that, leadership can only be earned. It cannot be entrusted, it cannot be given. The team, however the size is of any given team, needs to trust you with that position for you to be really in the position of leadership, to lead the team of any size, once again, to the destination where your strategic goal of anchoring that team is. And in that regard, it's the trust and credibility that needs to be earned with the way how the leader stimulates the team, how the leader consolidates the team, how leader shows the example of his or her commitment to the cause, himself or herself, and ability to sacrifice, and ability to trust the team itself as well, so that it's a mutual trust that emerges out of that. And in that regard, the way women can help the cause of more opportunities for women to open up is that women are good at the leadership position, so that in every position that you are, where you can claim that you have some level of leadership, you show that you are good at it, not for your own ambition and self-realization purposes, but then for the cause of all the other women as well, to break any stereotype that could be out there in any given profession, that women are not really fit for the leadership position in that given profession or given sector. As a very small anecdote that I can basically say of my own previous experiences, I remember I was very new as a Deputy Minister of Justice at that time, 27, 28 years old. I was responsible to deal with the penitentiary system, which was in a disastrous situation at the time, run by the organized crime mostly rather than the state, before we started to reform and fight organized crime. It was, I guess, my third or fourth day at job. I was still very new. I came in with my orange coat and then, you know, young female, so to say, as a deputy minister. And then we have the riot that started in one of the worst prisons. So I could see in my employees at the time, so that they came to me with the question, what do we do now? It was a very complex situation. I went there myself, so I did the negotiations with those who were the leaders of the riot at the time, so that we could have dealt with the situation, because we could not do anything by force at the time, in some situations when the state properly could have exercised that. And I could say that it was a shock for everybody. Maybe it was a shock to myself as well, because I've never done that. I've never been with the inmates in the prison at the verge of the major riot, to calm me down with the negotiation that made sense, and that made sense to them as well, to withhold the plans that they've had at the time, which was a major crisis that could have unfolded. And at the time, I could have sensed that some of the male colleagues that were with me, they had an understanding that in the crisis situations like these, which we could have emerged still to be until the situation settled, they could have trusted me as a leader, because when it was needed, I was not a softie, which would have been afraid of dealing with a crisis like that because of a woman. So that was one stereotype that was broken among people that I have worked with, and among the inmates as well, when they understood that the conditions that I gave them to them, they had to obey as well. Otherwise, we could have resorted to other measures. So in that regard, it's a sense of responsibility that is not extremely heavy, but we still feel as women that when we do something, we do it for ourselves primarily, but for others as well. As a mother of two daughters, I feel it every day by raising them, so that they have the same upbringing as my father and my mother did with me, when I never had any feeling or even understanding or perception that there was any difference between me and my brother. So I owe quite a lot to my own parents in that regard, and I guess that's to conclude with the way how we need to be advocates on that as well. It's the change of the mindset, which is societal. And then a lot of work needs to be done at very early stages, so that the families, and not even fathers, but primarily mothers, are not inflicting these cliches on the girls, what the good girl's supposed to be in terms of a good mother, in terms of good wife, and all of that, because as it happens, so in my own country, when I look into that, it's not even fathers mostly, but then mothers who are very vigilant on that. Not my mother, but many are. So in that regard, I would say that it is the leadership that we all have to take as the parents, no matter it's the boys or it's the girls that we are parenting. So they do have that understanding that equality is a profound beauty of the human race, and that diversity brings the strength to the resilience that we need to have while withstanding the challenges, but then in seizing the opportunities, as we have done for thousands of years for the development of the human race, and I hope for the good cause of not changing too much of the climate in the future, but then preserving the beauty of our planet as well for the future.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you, Camilo. Thank you for your question. So now I would like to remind the thesis on responsibilities and about the opportunities, great opportunities, but the two theses they are important. That's a kind of a very special, sensitive understanding of justice. And I want to remind the name of Catherine Gandziuk, the activist from Kherson, a friend of mine, our friend. And unfortunately, she was killed last year, about 1 year. And it's a very specific feelings, and then it burns in your heart, and then you have to respond. And the second is the so you have to be persistent. And Lilia Gemenger, and she got the certificate on advocacy activity. It was a Russian certificate, and for the long period of time, she couldn't get this certificate, and she pushed her to take off the Muslims' scarf, but she, despite of the fact that she got this certificate, just said it's, I should not take off the scarf, but she, despite of her, she got this certificate in a different region, but she got it, and then she works as the activist, and the motivation, the FSB service, they are pushing the women, and some women, they are not of great desire to become leaders because of this. And it's a movement of resistance, let's say, resilience ideas, and some taking the responsibilities on them, and then they understand that they have to do it. And they're talking about the internally displaced women for the year 2014 and 2015, but we are on the, let's say, on the wave of so-called external very first aid support, let's say. Now we are talking about the different amalgamated communities' needs, and it's very important to motivate and to provide the opportunities to the women on the regional level. And the important motivation would be, let's say, and lighting of the stars, working on the regional level, supporting them, supporting those projects and that people, those who are working on the occupied territories. And they should become the great samples, the sample to show that you should not be afraid, you should not be scared. And this is very important motivation. Thank you. Thank you for these words, and I would like to invite the very special guests and the special words to be given to the EU and EP resident representatives in Ukraine. Mrs. Dafina Gerchina, please welcome to share your own vision, and maybe you can enlighten more than we explain in the name of our panel. Thank you.
Доброго дня, good afternoon, distinguished panelists, honorable participants in the 3rd Ukrainian Women's Congress, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm truly thrilled, I'm honored, and I'm very pleased to be today with you. And I'm deeply thankful to the organizers for the extended invitation and for the given opportunity to address this honorable audience. I've been listening to this discussion with great interest, and I'm deeply impressed by the richness and insightfulness of all the interventions around and about gender equality, anti-discrimination, and human rights. I would like very briefly to reflect on one issue which is of particular concern to UN and to me personally as a woman and also as a mother of 2 children. And this is the issue of gender-based violence. I'm bringing up this issue to your attention because law enforcement bodies, justice, and of course all of us, we should drive the change, and we should be the champions for promoting gender equality and also for eliminating all forms of violence. It has been already mentioned many times that over the past few decades, a lot has been accomplished in Ukraine in terms of advancing gender equality and promoting and protecting human rights. However, this is still an unfinished agenda, and the journey is not over. Unfortunately, gender-based violence in Ukraine is widely spread. More than 70% of women between 15 and 48 years of age have experienced at least once in their lifetime either physical or psychological or sexual violence. Every year, 2 million Ukrainian women become victims of violence. This statistics is really shocking, and this grim phenomena has remained for a long time underreported and very poorly handled. The reasons are many, and they're very complex, and I would like to mention just 3 of them. Low trust of women in law enforcement bodies, weak capacity of law enforcement bodies to handle complaints, and very high level of acceptance by society of violence. So to address these challenges, as it has already been mentioned by many of the panelists, we need to change the mentality and the attitude of the entire society. We also need to establish a culture of zero tolerance to all forms of violence and discrimination, and we need to break stereotypes and social norms which perpetuate violence and violation of human rights. We also need to invest a lot in prevention by training police to be able to better handle complaints, by opening more shelters for victims of violence, by making different bits of the justice system liaise better with each other, and by encouraging victims of violence to speak up and to stand up for their rights. Because, ladies and gentlemen, silence kills, and we all need to speak up and stand up for our rights. Thank you.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you very much. This is an extremely important statement, and I think that yesterday more than 10 business companies signed the declarations for gender-sensitive policy for their employees and the separate program for prevention domestic violence. So business feels their social responsibility for this topic, and now it reaches extremely new level, and I do hope that this personal responsibility and this fight for gender equality and home or gender violence prevention would be felt by each of us. And now please raise your hands who would like to give the questions. You now raise the hands like everybody, so to understand how many questions are accepted. We have a lot of panelists, so please address your questions personally, and I probably will give the chance to respond to everyone. Please raise your hands. Okay, I see. So first of all, I am Yulia Depeshko-Drews, Chernivtsi region. I would like to thank the ladies for their leadership example, for their inspiration, and at the same time I have the question to Ms. Denisova. You've spoken that last parliament we had some problem with sexism and discrimination towards women. And why don't you see of the sexism and violence which has already happened with new parliament and from the first persons in our, when commenting about sweets and the body figures? And sometimes this is human rights activism at the level of state is kind of just pretending, because civil society is more sensitive toward this. And the second one, to all of the panelists, how, in your opinion, we should do to de jure, by the first people from the state, gender equality proclaimed was turned into de facto, because something what they say and what they do about women who deal with politics, they actually more deal with propaganda of hatred culture and discrimination culture rather than gender equality. Okay, any other hands raised? I see one more question, I guess, yeah? Thank you. Ludmila Akimova, Odessa region, the expert in gender issues and the head of the group for the home violence preventing in the region. My question is to Ms. Venediktova. Can you tell us, please, 2 years ago, we have adopted two very important laws, and it is already the year when the law on criminalization of home violence is in force, and 2 years for home violence prevention law is in force. Too many challenges for this law's implementation, whether the parliament and for the Equal Opportunities Caucus, whom I would like to express my gratitude for lobbying for this topic. So does the Parliament plan the session on analyzing the implementation of these two laws, and what are the issues and the challenges? And I would like to ask you to highlight the analysis of the decision taken by the judicial branch, because whatever police and civil society do, if we don't have any adequate and fair decisions for protecting women and children who suffer from domestic violence, we wouldn't see the result that the whole society is hoping for. So we should totally understand that the woman would feel protected and would feel inspired by the opportunity if she feels security in the family. And fighting domestic violence, this is the step towards the security of the whole state. So this question is extremely important.
I would like to ask the question to Tamila, because we in the parliament, the previous parliament, we were trying to take some not standard decisions about domestic violence, how to prevent domestic violence. So we had even the performance regarding this, and it was really very helpful to accept this problem and to understand so well. So we have to understand how it works and how it could be helpful to advocate and to support. And this is a problem we're still in the process of discussion. Maybe we should have some creative, non-ordinary solutions to have. So thank you. So, well, I think that you're ready to react. So thank you for your questions. As for the parliamentary hearings, it's a very active mechanism. And the last parliamentary hearings, and I was there, and these parliamentary hearings, they were with Mr. Kondratyuk already reminded me, just, to start to verbalize this problem on the level of parliament, we have to use the so-called parliamentary control activities, because when we're talking about the laws, the draft laws, they are in process of creating and then the implementing. But how to use it, the members of parliaments, they are just, even forgetting about how to implement. So the feedback and the idea of feedback is very important. And today we're going to have Marina Bardina of Sluga Naroda, of Servants of the People fraction. Representative would be here. So, well, we have to have this parliamentary hearings, and we have to have it quite soon. My committee is dealing with the different issues, and well, we just, we will join and we will participate. And it would be great to invite the members of parliament also for these meetings, just to participate. Sometimes it happens different way. I think maybe it's too emotional to comment. The parliamentary hearings, sometimes they are transformed into parliamentary blah blah activities. So, well, and people are coming to there. Well, we have to be in the process of understanding how it works. So, well, we understand that we do have representatives from the public society here. Well, it's quite understandable. When I was participating in the freedom of voice, the freedom of words hearing, that was interesting meeting, and we had a lot of directors, producers came to discuss. So, well, for me, it was very interesting to get to understand the new point of views, etc. So the public people, it's important to hear also from them. So parliamentary hearings without any members of parliament, it looks like they, just the absolutely, non-active thing. So it should be active thing. So well, thank you. So well, could you react, Mrs. Ludmila? So thank you for your question. I really support you regarding your specific notes you told us. It should not be the sexist saints, but we have to work it out. From our side, we of course we accept that this is bad thing. So we understand that those activities in our parliament, that's the educational activity is very important. The activity of educational approach is very important. The educational approach should be on the high level of the executive bodies, authorities. So while you're watching it, the mass media is not opening or giving us the disclosure of the real situation and our real position. So I would provide the opportunity for you, and I mean, to join us to the work of our coordination council, and we will discuss the issue on equal opportunities, equal rights, and the counterparting of discriminations. And then you will get the opportunity to discuss, to talk. I will provide this information to the different levels, political levels. As for the gender equality, it should be the transformation from the words of gender equality into the activity of gender activity as it is. So it's in process. Mrs. Roosevelt says that it should be the real work, especially when she's working out the human rights declaration. So, well, it should be completed. It should not be incomplete. It should be completed, this work. And I am glad that we do have this movement and the activists. And I've seen that how many things had been done. And I know that we got a lot of critics and criticism from our Istanbul's Convention ratifications, etc. So we got a lot of critical approaches. But I'm not worrying. I will move on, and with your specific support, we will do it. We will break through. Thank you, Mrs. Ludmila. I would like to add a few words. Well, as for the cultural of the gender sensitivity, we have to educate ourselves how to be gender sensitive, and penalties is not the motivation, but it should be accepted the best way. It should not be accepted badly. Policy is not only the man's political fight. It's a political man's fight, whatever. So we have to understand that what does it mean, gender. The policy should be with gender equality.
Нічого образливого.
I'm sure that they didn't want to offend anyone, but this is the way that he feels, and this is his interpretation. So don't get lazy, because sometimes it feels that I do this 24 hours a day, but you should highlight why are you wrong, why should you use the other wordings, but to do it really fast to change this culture of thinking, I support Eka fully, that with the children, our children are going to respond to this in a very different way. And the more feedback you get, the more person can think.
And I cannot be silent on the violence-related issues, which is a huge problem, not only in Ukraine, but in many countries where we've been shocked that it was a problem, as it was in the case of Georgia. That's an interesting phenomenon, and I see that there are similarities perhaps in that with Ukraine. When you are raised with this cultural understanding of your own identity, where women are respected, they are seen to be the cornerstone of the society in so many ways, which led the nation to sustain all of the challenges that the nation had. And in Georgia, the motherhood and mother is at the pedestal, as we were known that it was, the way we raised. And then you discover the other side of the coin, that in the society where supposedly that is the case, you have the problem of the gender-based violence. And you are not immune to that. And there are cases which are shocking at some level individually that come out of it. So it's an opening of the mindset for the generations who were raised with the perception as if we don't have this problem because it was never reported, never put the light on it. So openness in terms of understanding that we do have a problem and what are the features of the problem in different societies that we could face is the starting point, but it's just the starting point. Tolerance to that crime needs to be tackled with a lot of work, with cross-cutting sort of elements of the society, generation-wise, different segments of the societies in different parts of the countries. But to me, if there is no real strategy in the country, how to identify the root causes of not only the problem why it emerges, but why women find it difficult to fight violence in the families especially, then it's only about the laws and it's about punishment only when it comes to it as a way of prevention of further crimes. And what I mean by this strategy, it's quite a lot of social problems that one needs to understand why women find themselves vulnerable of not coming out from the situations where in different ways they could be facing violence, but they see it impossible to leave the situation because of the fear of not having any social means of sustaining themselves or their children, and then because they do lack at the time of their life perhaps any training to get the jobs, and they are afraid, and that fear factor restricts them to fight back. It's not the physical vulnerability of softness so that you cannot punch back perhaps a man, but it's the way how in a given situation women feel vulnerable of leaving the situations in which they are assaulted, even physically. So in that regard, the state has that responsibility to dig deeper into the root causes as the problems. They might be in many ways social as well. And it's when we speak about the shelter, so any follow-up action that the state can give as a protection to women, it's physical protection when it comes to the criminal justice type of reaction to the situation, but then it could be much more. It could be trainings, it could be putting them or helping them to be back on the job market, even if they have never been because of the family situations previously, so that they understand that they are helped by the society, they are not ostracized by their own families because they stood up and spoke about the violence that they have been victim to. And then they are able to go on and live their lives and maintain their families and predominantly their children if they take children with them. So the justice system needs to be their protector, especially with relation to how they maintain their children with them if it comes to this, and then how they are able to live their lives. And it's an extremely difficult problem, and then having the law against violence is just very important, but one element into it, obviously. So we need to speak about much more to have more guarantees that the violence could be curbed down.
Дякую. Оскільки ми
Thank you very much. So if we've touched the topic of justice, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Chornenka, and then Ms. Tasheva is going to finish our conversation. So somebody spoke today that women are more rigid, that's why they take the posts. I don't like to fight this statement. I believe that the culture of behavior, not only from the childhood and not only from the family, if to deal with the recent history, when it was was allowed to smoke in public places, and when it was allowed to, there was no punishment for driving being under effect of alcohol. It was a minimal punishment. So I believe that the lack of punishment, the lack of discussion, the lack of hearing will give the result. I believe personally that when there is a penalty, the punishment, it will root in the country after some time. This year I visited Singapore, and they have very rigid penalties, but this country, which de facto has only the access to the sea and very nice climatic zone to do such a kind of state, and I think this penalty played its role in the country process creation. As for fighting family violence, and that the courts don't give the effective decisions. I worked as a judge for 17 years at the regional court, and I know it from my own perspective. It's not the point. The decisions are taken, and the penalties are paid, and these women, they don't have any place to go, and they go back to their families, and whatever penalty or fee the court gives, if the woman has no place to escape her abuser, she goes back to there, and the efficiency of implementation is to restrict the communications. There are no people in police or in other services, and it's a really big problem. When the law was put into force, in our region they even didn't hear that. The only thing that they heard that we've changed the title again, and to do it effectively, to fight domestic violence, I think we have huge resource for women to find the place to go, and when they feel what I believe the freedom is from the abuser, then it will get better. But here are the important statement in the history where to go and how to stay in your home and be secured. So these are the questions of the diversity for restrictive documents when we know that the person with a child can actually stay in her house. This is the secured place. And in our state policy, we should think about shelters. Of course, they are extremely important, so the person have a chance to go to the shelter, but still to provide the opportunity to remain in her house where she is the mistress. So, Tamila, a conclusion. Thank you very much for this question, Maria, and I have a lot of emotions and actually a lot of things to recall, because I used to be the person who in 2015 I've been at the hearing at this play 7 in the parliament, and I express my gratitude to Swedish embassy for them organizing this. And I do remember this heroine I played. Her name was Mukhtar Mai. This is a woman from Pakistan. And at those times, she used to be a girl, and it was a very horrible story of her being raped. And it led to her fighting the human rights and for education for girls. She established a school in one of the Pakistan provinces when this spread in all of the country. And at that point, it was a very inspiration for me. And the stories of these 7 women we heard too. And I do know that it caused a wave of different legislation initiatives that, thanks to this highlighting of the topic, became possible, and it is extremely important. Actually, this highlighting of an issue, like both in Crimea and in mainland Ukraine, is providing the opportunities. And when talking about the Crimea, is the prevention, because if the person is already put into prison, the Russian Federation will never recognize its mistake. If Russia wants to put a person in jail, it will happen inevitably. but in many cases we should do as a prevention for other people. Emil Kurbedinov, the attorney in Crimea, who when he was first detained and given 10 days of administrative restriction, we raised a huge wave at the international level when his question was widely spoken, and then he was given the award from Frontline Defenders, who actually deal with human rights activist protection, and I can name a lot of other women. So this is basically the prevention via these interactive, very interesting performances. We are raising this topic, and if we could do something in Ukraine Parliament, it would have been very useful. Probably we could lead. I am not actually the advocate of parliamentary hearings, but to communicate the questions of gender violence and the resistance at the occupied territories. It would have been very important. So, thanks to everybody. We are finishing our panel.
Залишитись на платформі для
Please stay on the platform for the photo, and now there is a break until 2 o'clock. Please keep your cell phones on the chairs, and our gratitude to the partners who supported the third Women Ukrainian Congress.
Український жіночий конгрес проводиться у партнерстві з Національним демократичним інститутом, Агентством США з міжнародного розвитку, Міжнародною організацією Global Communities, Швецією, Посольством Канади в Україні та Фондом розвитку ефективного врядування Великої Британії. Ми вдячні програмі для України з розширення прав і можливостей на місцевому рівні, підзвітності та розвитку YouLead з Європою, яка спільно фінансується з Європейським Союзом та його країнами-членами Данією, Естонією, Німеччиною, Польщею та Швецією. Ми також вдячні структурі ООН «Жінки» в Україні, програмі розвитку ООН в Україні, ЮНІСЕФ в Україні, Бюро з демократичних інститутів і прав людини ОБСЄ, проекту «Проміс» та Федерації канадських муніципалітетів та проекту «Гендерне бюджетування в Україні», представництву Європейського Союзу в Україні, представництву НАТО в Україні, Офісу Ради Європи в Україні, консультативній місії ЄС в Україні, посольствам Норвегії, Данії та Швеції в Україні, а також Сітібанк в Україні, фонду Олени Пінчук та компаніям Coca-Cola та Horizon Capital.